welcome. It's Get a Job episode 4, 5, I don't know, we'll see where this gets uploaded. But I'm with Zach, or better known as maybe Dash. You've gone through a few different iterations of Dash, haven't you, as well? It was like
Yeah, I think we
Gaijin
we
Dash,
settled
or...
on Dash. I mean, that was like during my weeb times of in Japan. I dropped that pretty fast once I left, but Dash is fine.
Right,
I
so,
think not many people, pretty much everybody knows me as Zach nowadays.
yeah.
I think I stopped really calling myself Dash a long time ago. It was
Yeah.
more of a plain thing.
Yeah, I suppose it's kind of the same for me, right? Like, I've gone from Elfishguy, and a lot of people just call me Jordan now on broadcasts. But anyway, we're not here to really talk about me. We're here to talk about you and sort of your pathway in esports and what you do. So I think what we should probably start off with is mostly surrounding the topic of this. Obviously, we're talking about being a team manager for an org, and you've had quite a lot of experience with that. So do you want to give me like a very brief rundown of like maybe what kind of teams you've managed and sort of where that pathway's come from?
Yeah, so the two main organizations that I've done team management for were Avant, as you'd know, and then for Mineski Pro Team, which was about a year and a half, the last year and a half. So at Avant, they're also like two very different team managing jobs. With Mineski Pro Team, it was specifically a Dota 2 team, so I only managed a Dota 2 team. We had a couple of FIFA players during that year and a half, but like I would say 95% of my time was spent managing that Dota team. But with Avant, I was with Avant for I want to say like 3.5 years, something like that. You can ask Wes. That was we had the League of Legends team, but that was kind of handled mostly by Brucey, even though for a long time we were in the same house. And then I was in charge more of the Counter-Strike team, but we had because like you know what Australian esports is like, right? A lot of these orgs have 4, 5, 6, several teams, right? So in that sense, managing those teams is much more of like a logistical issue. You have a lot of teams that you need to manage and a lot of people you need to manage. And towards the end, I wasn't really managing the teams as much as I was managing the managers, which is a whole different job in itself, right? So at Avant, I had mainly the Counter-Strike team. So I went to China with the Counter-Strike team, local lands in Sydney, Adelaide, Melbourne with them. So that was like our main team. And then I managed like Rocket League, Street Fighter players, Overwatch players, you name it, I managed it pretty much.
Yeah, so that's pretty interesting, right? Because you have already sort of touched on something that I want to maybe chat about later on down the track, in that you obviously started as a team manager, but then it feels like you kind of moved into a bit more of a general manager position. So maybe we'll talk about that in a bit of a little discussion later on. But what I want to start with is like how you even got that role as a team manager in the first place, because again, you obviously already mentioned that you were in Japan, you were interested in esports and sort of involved a little bit in esports, as I understand, before you moved back to Australia and got that role at Avant. But how did that sort of come about?
Yeah, well, I mean, without going on a long story rendition of how I got to where I got to, um, I was actually originally studying science, so I was doing like biochemistry, biotechnology, and I finished my degree and my honors, and I felt myself, as I think a lot of people who are like 2021 feel, I felt sort of stuck. I didn't feel like I had very much perspective on like my life and where I wanted to go. Um, Especially because during the time that I had been studying, my main focus was actually Dota. My focus was playing Dota. I wanted to be the best that I could be. I never got to where I wanted to be, but I think that that's the reality for, to be honest, like 95% of people who have like aspirations to play professionally, right? It's just like regular sports. Not everybody plays in the NBA. That's just how it is. So I finished my study and I was a little bit lost. And I remember I was out to coffee with a friend, and he was like, "Well, have you considered doing something like completely different for a while?" Like, because I'd never traveled outside of Australia, and I was like, "Well, I mean, I could just go and have a holiday for 3 months, but one, I don't have the money, and two, I don't see how that really gets me anywhere." So what I ended up settling on doing was I moved to Japan. I lived there for 3 years, and I was just an English teacher, just living over there as an English teacher. And the reason was because I kind of wanted a bit of perspective on my life and what I was doing. I knew that I found esports interesting. I knew that I had passion for Dota, but I didn't really know how to connect those things. Um, and the reason why I ended up starting to work in esports was because I was working this teaching job in Japan, and depending on where you are, you end up being kind of like a what's the word, like a statue in the corner. You're kind of there to make the school just like look
Yeah,
good
yeah,
for
yeah.
having a foreign English teacher,
Yeah.
right? So I just had a lot of free time, and I would have days, I would have months where I would just sit at a desk with nothing to do, because the classes get cut before exams at my high school. It's not super important, but suffice to say, I had a lot of free time on my hands. And I was just like, I feel like if I'm just sitting in front of a desk for 8 hours a day, I'm just wasting my life, right? So what I started doing was I just started writing about what I know, which is Dota. So I started writing about how to get better at Dota, the thought processes behind it. I did a little bit of research on psychology and stuff like that, and tied that together with what I was writing about. And I basically just packaged it up and went to Liquid Dota and messaged the admins and said, "Can I post this article on your site?" And they said, "Yeah, sure." So I posted that and it got decent amount of traction. And then the admins actually asked if I wanted to come on and be a regular writer, which would involve not just writing stuff that I was interested about, but doing like regular editorials, commentaries, news, that kind of stuff. So I did that for a little while. And they actually asked me to start like running the editorial team because I was like very hands-on. I was always asking if there was any other stuff I could help out with.
Mm.
So I ended up working for Liquid Dota for probably 6 to 8 months, just helping them like run their editorial team. It wasn't a huge amount of work, but it was kind of, it was in the ballpark of doing esports stuff. So I figured,
Was that a paid gig or was that just volunteer stuff?
no, no, I definitely didn't get paid. I didn't get paid for a long time.
Yeah.
I think I worked for Avant for about 6 months to a year before I got paid. And then even when I started getting paid, I was like, basically like contracted to get money, but I didn't end up getting the money until like much further
Yeah.
down the line. And it was not a large amount. It was
Yeah.
very, very, very small. Um, so so to fast forward to the Avant stuff, I'm doing the Liquid Dota stuff, and I got a message from one of Avant's older staff who I knew through Dota. And he basically said, how's things going? And I talked to him about what I was doing, and he said, well, actually, Avant is looking for, a new manager for this Smite team. Do you want to do that? And I said, sure, why not? I've never managed a team before, right? But he was like, no, it's fine, just give it a go. So I managed that team for a while. And then I ended up moving into like the general manager role where I was not just managing the Smite team, but I was managing a bunch of other teams, helping out with the social media. But probably the majority of my time when I first joined Avant was actually like managing social media accounts. I basically did that social media job for like year and a half before I was like majority off of it.
Right. So for you to get that position, it was more of a case of like just doing something in esports and kind of getting your name and face out there, and then inevitably you knew someone or someone knew you, and the option presented itself, and you were kind of like a yes man, like I'll do it and see how it goes, kind
Yeah.
of thing.
I think and I don't think that this just applies to esports. I think this applies to life. I
Mm.
think in life you're eventually going to get opportunities, right? Unless you kind of just sit around and do nothing, you'll eventually be given opportunities. And a lot of the time those opportunities involve taking risks, like not getting paid, like moving to a different country,
Mm.
that kind of thing. And it's just about recognizing those opportunities and then going for it and willing to put the work into something that you think is valuable. um I just got an offer out of somebody who I knew from doing random stuff. But the job that I got at Liquid Dota in the first place that got me kind of like thinking about what I was doing in esports, that was purely me just deciding to like get off my ass and do something esports related, do something
Yeah.
writing related. That wasn't where I wanted to be. I didn't want a career as a journalist, but I just ended up, one thing leads to another. And esports is kind of like that because it's a burgeoning industry. It's a little bit more flexible. There's a lot of overlap and roles, that kind of thing. So yeah,
Certainly,
that's how I ended up at Avant.
it seems like something that sort of transcends the roles as well. Like I've talked to a few people, and they almost always say like, just do something. Like even if it's not related to what you want to end up doing or what you may end up doing inevitably, it's better to be doing something than to be doing nothing, because at least then you're sort of getting your name and your brand out there, which I definitely think is true. But I also want to touch on maybe some of the things that you might have learned. Do you think like you had any sort of previous skills or anything like that that came through from either your teaching stuff in Japan or some of the stuff at the Liquid Dota or anything like that that kind of helped you when you moved into that role as a team manager at Avant?
Um, it's definitely a learning process. I think that probably the the skill that I have, or the ability that I have that has helped me the most, is I'm just very resilient. Uh you need to like learn to overcome struggles. Like there will be times when you're stressed, you don't know what to do. You need to learn a skill that you don't know how to do. Like I remember when the first time I started doing reporting for Avant for sponsors,
Huh.
I didn't have a clue. I don't have a marketing degree. I didn't know what a KPI was. Like I just kind of worked it out myself, right? And
Yep.
a lot of it was me working with wares or watching podcasts, doing reading, or just like flat out trying things. But like the skill that I have is that I'm resilient, and I was willing to at least think outside of my comfort zone. And I think that that whole like moving to Japan from the start, sort of, it taught me a lot about myself. I think
Yeah.
the one thing that I learned, because I remember I'd been in Japan for like about a month and didn't speak any of the language. It was hot, it was foreign, and I was just like, I hate it here. I want to go home. I remember like sitting in my house like on my own, just like crying because I didn't know what to do. I was like, this is a huge mistake.
Yep.
But I just chose that. I was like, I'm gonna make this work for a year, and I just didn't give myself an option. And when I came out the other side of it, 2, 3 months later, I realized, oh, actually, it's not that bad. I think a lot of like problems in life, and I think this applies a lot to jobs in esports. When you come out the other side of it and you've found a solution, you look back and you're like, oh, that actually wasn't that hard. And then the next time you like hit one of those roadblocks, you know that last time your perception of how hard that was, it is actually blown much more out of proportion than you think it is. And so you kind of like, as you grow as a person over time, you learn to like overcome those roadblocks step by step and not freak out, and make sure that you're looking for solutions, because when you look back at it in
Yeah.
retrospect later, it's actually a lot easier than you think it is.
Yeah, I get what you're saying. Like, I think there's a lot of learning involved when it comes to esports, and you can kind of get into these positions without having any prior skills. And a lot of what you are able to do seems to come from just your life, not necessarily like goals, but what you've learned and how you've matured as a person throughout your life, and that seems to be enough. Like your general knowledge about just how life works sometimes can get you through a lot of the situations that are going to arise in esports, because it's such
Yeah,
a sort of new sort of industry that's sort of building up and that kind of thing. Another
and
question I
that's
have,
it. Yeah,
what
go on.
you is like for you, obviously you might have had some expectations going into esports, but did it sort of, what did it meet your expectations, or was it a little bit different to what you thought it was going to be like?
um Well, I think it's like important to note that esports now in 2020
Hmm.
compared to
2015.
2014,
Yeah.
and then even before that, like I remember watching the first international, which was in 2011. I remember watching CS 1.6 in 2008.
Yep.
So esports now compared to where it was before is much different. Um, Depending on where you are, it's different. In Southeast Asia and Australia, it's still kind of the wild west.
Hmm.
Especially in Australia, it's only those first rounds of VC that are kind of coming into the mix, and those corporates that are joining. In America, it's much more established, and Europe as well. The VC behind the bigger organizations. I'm talking specifically for teams. Obviously, the event organizers are way bigger now.
Yeah.
But for teams and organizations, they're much more VC backed. If you look at an organization like Complexity, they basically function as a branch of a corporate, right? They still have their leaders within the organization, but they have a normal organizational structure. They have much more flow to who's responsible for what, right? If you look at these organizations, even in Southeast Asia, a lot of them, right? They're essentially like kind of SMEs, like small medium enterprises at the most, or startups. Avant for the longest time was, and I think it still is a startup technically. They
Yep.
they have less than 10 staff for sure, not including players.
Yep.
So depending where you are, it's a lot different. Like where like the esports experience that you're going to
Hmm.
get. Um, but for me, I think that for a lot of it, I think that my experience was kind of what I expected. I learned very fast, and I think that anybody who's looking to be involved in esports should learn that you have to be multi-skilled. You have to
Hmm.
be, you can't walk into the profession and be like, I'm going to be a team manager, and that's like all you do.
Yeah.
I think the reason why if I'd walked into Avant being like, I'm going to be the team manager that manages the team, you get a lot of situations where somebody will ask you, oh, can you do this? Can you do social media? Can you do reporting?
Yep.
And I could have very easily been like, nope, not my problem. But me taking on those responsibilities and learning how to do those things is what has helped me grow a career that is full-time in esports, right?
100%.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think you get where I'm coming from.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, you
Yeah.
want to sort of be the yes man in a sense when it comes to this kind of thing.
Not so much a yes man, but willing. Like I said before, it's about willing to step out of your comfort zone and appreciating that if you want a job in esports right now, especially a job as a team manager, unless you're working for a very big, North American or European organization, which is much more corporate, and even then, it still helps a lot to be multi-skilled.
Yeah. All right. Well, let's talk a little bit more about the role of a team manager in specifics, because
Okay.
obviously you've had a fair bit of experience with that. So I'd like to pick your brains as to what kind of person. Like, I know we've sort of talked about what kind of person might be good for working in esports, but like, is there anything in particular that you feel like you need to be able to have to succeed as a team manager?
It depends what kind of team manager you're talking about. They're two very different leadership roles. If you're talking, so I'll break it broadly into, if you're like let's call it like a C-level team manager, where you're either managing other managers or you're managing a myriad of teams. So I'll give you an example. So Soren from Complexity, he was for a time looking after the Dota team just because they were transitioning between managers. But his job was actually as a team general manager of Complexity, managing all of their rosters, right?
Yep.
So him, so I've known him for a while now, and so we were at a lot of events together, and he commented as well that the experience for him was very jarring going to managing like a team full time, like intimately managing a team, because he had a lot of experience managing multiple rosters where he wouldn't see them very often. But then transitioning to managing just one team, and that being, I mean, he still had to handle the other teams, but being full time with a Dota team is like a totally different kind of dynamic. So do you want to start with the single team or the multiple teams first?
Let's start with the single team.
Okay, so um, managing a single team is very, very relationship driven. It's very primarily it's trust and relationship driven. So you, to be honest, you kind of need to prove to these players, especially of when you get to players of a certain caliber, when you get to like sorry, give me a sec. When you get to like tier 1 players, like top level players, they're to be perfectly honest, they're used to a certain level of treatment, right? When you go to big ESL events, big Valve events, big DreamHack events, you're used to a certain standard of care.
Right.
So you need to prove to these players that you're very capable of doing your job. They don't want to spend 5 hours doing media if they don't have to. They don't want to don't want to do 6 interviews a day if they don't have to. They want to make sure that their food is on time. They want to make sure that they eat food that they like. They want to make sure that they're informed of what their schedule is, but they don't have to have too much to, check this calendar, do this thing, do this thing, do this thing, right? So you need to prove to them that not only can you do the base level of your job correctly, which is get them to get them to things on time, get them their food, blah blah blah. But also that you can understand them as a person, and be like attentive to their needs, and that they can trust you, if that makes sense.
It's like being their mum.
And yeah. So I've always joked that like being a team manager, say for Dota, is kind of like you're like the manager, psychologist, counselor, mother, nanny, professional life coach, all
Well,
of these things.
I think that
Dota
sums it up. That's the kind of person you need to be a team manager. There you go. Summarized
Yeah,
in 5 words.
you basically need
So
to be
easy.
all of those things at once.
Yeah. Okay. Well, how does that change then if you're managing multiple teams?
Okay, so when you're managing multiple teams, it's kind of like being the boss. When you manage a single team, you're not like you're the boss, but you're also not the boss. Like you're the boss, but the players are really the boss. Like the players do what you tell them to do, but they're doing it because they're being nice
Yeah.
and they want to work together with you because they're smart and they realize that if we work together, then we all kind of like get where we want to get. But at the end of the day, if you're managing especially a top level roster, your job is to eat shit. Like you're
Yeah.
not there to like have a super cruisy ride and everybody loves you, which is there are plenty of great managers that I know and their players love them. And I feel like my players, were very fond of me. I think that they like me. I think they would have a positive things to say about me if they ask. But your job as a team manager is to take the stress onto yourself.
Right.
You need to be there to be their punching bag. You need to be there to get blamed for things even when they're not your fault. That kind of thing. There's a lot of times at events where something will go wrong and you could blame it on the event organizer, and often you do, but there's sometimes where you need to be the one that gets hit by the bus. So in contrast, when you're managing multiple rosters, I'll just give you the example at Avant. Um, I am beholden not to the players, I'm beholden to Wes. I'm
Right.
beholden to my CEO, to
To
my
the org,
boss,
to the
right?
yeah.
To the org, yeah. So in that sense, it's much more like I am in charge of the players, and the players respond to me, and when they do something wrong, I have to slap them for it, that kind of thing. So it's a little bit more top down.
Right.
So and it's much more, I would say, like operationally and like logistics
Yeah.
focused. It's much more about keeping the cogs moving, make sure that processes are in place, things are getting done right, reports are getting done right, checking up on the managers mostly. For example, we had an Overwatch team. I didn't really talk to the players all that much. I talked to them enough to know them and have good rapport with them. But I spent most of my time investing in the team manager and helping coach the team manager, making sure that I enabled them as a leader to be as successful as possible. Because at the end of the day, if I manage them properly, they manage the team properly, and then I have a fifth of the work, right? It's just like
Yeah.
classic delegation.
So
So
it's
in that
like
sense, a little bit different.
it seems like it's less hands-on with the players if when you're sort of managing a lot of the teams. Like if you're across multiple teams, it's a lot less hands-on. Is that kind of like is that a step in progression upward in career? Like you manage a team and then you manage a team of teams, or is that
Uh,
just two different roles that aren't necessarily correlated to being on a hierarchy within the org?
I mean, isn't that kind of the same for every job? I think eventually, in any career, whether it be working for a corporate or working in esports, you start off doing the work hands on, and
Yep.
then eventually you move into a leadership role where you manage leaders, and your job is to enable people to do their job correctly, right? And
Sure.
then you're the boss of the bosses, and then you're the boss of the bosses' bosses. That's kind of how it works, right?
Yep.
But it depends on where you want to go. There are a lot of people, you know, I guess at the base level, if you're an esports player, right, your job, like if you're not being the one who's doing the work, then you're probably like a coach, right? Which is considered in the esports community to be like a step backwards, right? It's like
Mm.
once your career's done.
Yep.
Um, but yeah, when even in esports, okay, maybe you start as a team manager or something, but do you want to be just like I wouldn't say just a team manager, but is that where you see your career going full time? And maybe for some people it is, but
Yeah.
I would argue that for a lot of people, they want to be doing more. They want to have more impact. They want to have more influence. They want to do more, get more experience. So I think it's kind of just a natural progression that eventually you're going to move into doing more things, being in a leadership role, that kind of thing.
So do you see being a team manager just for an individual team as sort of like an entry level job in esports? At least if it were for, let's say, an Australian org, right?
Mm,
Obviously, it's a little bit different when you start looking at international organizations that are really big.
yep.
But it seems to me like it's a kind of a job that you can pretty easily get into without too many skills, without any real training prior, and use that as sort of like your launching pad for your career, whether it be as a team manager in the future or into something else.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that there's okay. Let's say you're walking into the esports industry and you don't have any experience at all.
Hmm.
The two, I guess, the three main areas that you're going to get into is either working for an organization, working for an events company, or working for somebody in media, like say your Liquid Dotas, your Respawn Ninjas, your
HLTV or something like that.
something like that, Snowball Esports or whatever.
Yep.
So when it comes to working for an organization, pretty much the two like base level jobs are going to be like either a team manager or a social media manager, probably one of those two. But it's about what you do once you get in those roles. So
100%.
I know a lot of people who have worked as team managers. I know a lot of people who have worked as social media managers. And not all of those people, most of those people, like one of two things happen. Either they upskill and they learn new skills or new jobs that they can do. They learn more about esports generally, and they move into other not higher roles or just a myriad of roles, or they stop esports and they go do something else.
All right. Well, what do you think is the best way to kind of get into those roles now? Because speaking from a team manager's perspective, like how do you even find a way in 2020? Because like I think it was a lot different, right? Back in 2015 or 2016 or whenever.
Yeah. I mean, look, right now I'm not looking for a brand new job in esports, so I don't think that I have as much of a relevant perspective here. But all I can speak on is like, to my point is, what I did is I just chose to do something.
Yeah.
I didn't walk straight into a team manager's job in esports. I didn't say I want a career in esports. I looked at what I was passionate about, which was Dota, and I had some interest in esports, and I found something that connected those things and just started doing it and putting myself out there.
Okay, how about we spin it this way? What if you were the one hiring a team manager? Let's say you're still with Mineski Dota, right? And you want to find another team manager, you want to move up in the company, you want to find someone to essentially replace your role. Like, what are you looking for there, or how do you go about finding someone for that role?
Okay, so it depends if it needs a certain skill set, a certain experience set, right? So if I was looking for a new team manager for a Dota team, like a top level Dota team, I'm not just going to hire some random guy who's never managed an esports team before,
Yep.
because that asset is too valuable. We have players whose performance means too much for the success of our organization, right? So I need somebody who's competent. So in that sense, I'm going to hire somebody who has experience. If I'm trying to hire like a social media manager or a team manager for like an entry level team, like let's say I'm an Australian org and we just picked up a new, I don't know, Mobile Legends team, right? Because mobile games are not very big in Australia right now.
Sure.
That would be different than if I hired like a Counter-Strike manager, right? Because Counter-Strike or League of Legends are big games in Australia.
Yeah.
So you probably want to hire a team manager who's got a little bit more experience. But if I'm hiring somebody who's it's not a requirement for them to have an experience in their skill set. I'm looking for the right person, like the right fit for the job, right? So I've always said that you can teach skills, but you can't teach personality. And I think that that was the case for myself. I walked into esports when I didn't have any skills in esports, really. I learned them all myself. But I feel like I had a personality that was willing enough to challenge myself, learn, be adaptable, be resilient, all of those things. So those kind of skills are what I'm looking for in people that I'm hiring. So I guess my to sum it up, to put a bow on it, I would say that you need to be actively looking for anything that you can do and putting yourself out there, but you need to have a very internal focus, because in this industry, like we've touched on before, it's a very multi-skilled industry. You need to be able to think out of the box and be adaptable and be resilient, all of those things, right? So if you look at yourself and you can honestly say that those are things that you struggle with, that's what you should work on first. You should work on like, okay, I'm not very adaptable. I'm not very like, I pigeonhole my thinking too much. What can I do to expand that? Maybe I need to listen to some podcasts. Maybe I need to listen to some esports podcasts. Maybe I need to listen to Joe Rogan and Sam Harris or something, so that I can upskill myself as a person, and come across when I'm going into an interview as somebody who has those personality traits that are going to make me successful. If I throw you in the deep end, basically, if I throw you in the deep end, are you going to drown or are you going to swim?
Yeah.
Because if I hire the wrong person and I put you in challenging situations and you fall apart, then that just makes my job harder, right?
Yep.
And at the end of the day, I'm running an esports org. I'm not a charity. So as much as I'm more than willing to invest my time, and a lot of people in esports are like this, they're willing to invest their time and their teaching and their effort in other people if those people are the right people to teach, right? They're not going to waste their time on people who are not willing to learn, not willing to be adaptable, not willing to kind of go above and beyond. I guess it's similar to this like the emerging idea in esports that everybody has to get paid.
Yeah.
And don't get me wrong, I think that people should get paid for doing work, right? Um, but I've always said that and this applies um, to esports as well, is that a good job pays you twice. It pays you in like money and it pays you in experience. So I think that people who have that perspective, especially at an entry level esports job, that like at the very least I'm getting paid in experience in doing this job and I'm being rewarded that way, and they have that kind of focus rather than like immediate rewards, I think that will get you way further than if you're like, oh, I have to get, how much are you paying me for this job?
Yeah.
Because a lot of the time, especially at entry level jobs, even if you were getting paid, it's not that much anyway, right?
No, it would be like
So
maybe $50 a week, if that sort of thing.
yeah, exactly. So when I was working my first job at Avant, I was in Japan and I was working like 9 a.m. till 3 p.m. like normal school hours in Japan, right? Um, and admittedly, I had a lot of free time then, so I would spend most of my day doing Avant work, right? I'd have the occasional classes, and then I'd be doing like social media posting, talking to graphic designers, managing teams, doing this, that, and the other, right? But what a lot of people don't know is that I would come home after school and I would work all night as well. I would probably finish working, sometimes 11, 12 p.m. Because I would do live coverage for our Counter-Strike matches and our League of Legends matches. So I basically worked a 24/7 job. I didn't get paid for it. I worked Monday through Sunday. I never took a day off. Even the job that I work now, at IO, I'm in the office pretty much every day.
Yeah.
And it's not because I'm forcing myself to, it's just how I'm used to working. But because we're an SME, we're very flexible. But I'm in the office every day. I don't say like, oh, I'm not working on Sunday. I'm not working on Saturday. This is my day off. You all leave me alone. At the end of the day, especially in SME esports companies, it's the work is 24/7. There's always some stuff to do, and you need to make yourself available to do that work if it needs to get done.
I think that's a good
And
term to transition into, like talking about what kind of work you need to be doing in esports, like how much work you need to be doing, that kind of thing. So obviously you're touching on like your role there in Avant, but like is that like the expectation, or is that just what you chose to do? How many hours would you say that a normal team manager might have to actually put into working that role? Like, is it a 9 to 5, or are you on call? Like, what's the workload when there's events on versus no events? Like, there's a lot of questions I think that kind of go into that.
okay, I've always said that there's working, especially esports jobs, it's like this double-edged sword. In that you feel like you're always working, but then you also feel like you're never working. It's kind of weird. Especially I got this a lot at Avant as well, because a lot of your job can feel like very intangible. You do like you do like something like reporting, right? Like when you finish your report, you've got like, here's the report, I did the report, right? When you finish a plan, you're like, here's the plan, I did the plan, right? But a lot of the time you're just around like, like pottering around doing little things, but not doing a huge amount of work. So in that sense, you're not really doing heaps of work. It's not like every day 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. you're like frantic, flat out doing heaps of work, right? But you also never stop. Like it's hard to take a beat. It's hard to take a night off because there's always like
An email
a
or
couple
something.
little an email, like some little things to do. And in that sense, one of the challenges in working an esports job is trying to like mentally cut out time in which you can unwind and relax. And that's still a process that I'm learning how to do now. But in terms of the workload, yeah, you're just always working. But the upside as well is I really enjoy what I'm doing, right? So it's like work a job you love, you never work a day in your life,
Yeah.
blah blah blah. So it's a little bit like that. But yeah, you will expect to always kind of be working, but then it's not like you're working at a big law firm or insurance firm where like the work is like really
Hardcore.
like punishing.
Yeah. So how does that change? Like, obviously that seems to be like your normal workload, but how does that change when you're working at an event? Like, obviously you've mentioned you obviously applied to China here and there with the CSGO team. I know you've obviously worked a lot in Asia with the Mineski Dota team and around places. So like, how does that change when you're actually on site working
Okay.
at an event?
Maybe it's easier if I just give you a bit of like a rundown of what the workflow is like
Sure.
generally. So for the Dota team last year, it started. The season goes kind of like September to September, right? Because it starts just after TI finishes, and then you have the DPC schedule. So you have qualifiers, and then if you qualify for the DPC event, you go to the event, play the event, and then there's 5 majors per year, and then if you qualify for TI, you go TI, right?
Yep.
So the general kind of workflow is we'd do boot camp in Kuala Lumpur and then play the qualifier. And then if we qualified for the major event, then we'd fly to the major and then we'd fly back. And then in between those, we would have things like ESL 1 events. So over the year, I think we qualified for 3 majors and 1 minor, and we played, I think, 3 or 4 ESL events. And we played like a DreamHack Mumbai as well. So over the year, I think I traveled to like 11 or 12 countries through Europe, Southeast Asia, including China as well. So a lot of it is like flight. Like, well, I live in Malaysia, right? So
Yep.
we'd play the boot camp, we'd play a qualifier, and then after the qualifier, there'd be maybe a week, 5 days a week, and then we would be flying to an event and then flying to a major, and then we'd fly back, and as soon as we'd flown back, it would be straight into boot camp for another qualifier, or like directly into a qualifier. So in those downtime periods where they're either just practicing before a major or a big event, or they're like on a short break before we fly out, it's doing things like organizing visas. So when you're at the boot camp, you're looking after the players, then you organize a bunch of visas. Sometimes you're doing both at the same time, and then you fly to an event. And then when you're at an event, the majority of what you're doing is like planning. I need to be here at this time. I need to get food at this time. They have a match at this time. This person likes coffee. This person likes Chinese food. This person's allergic to this thing. And it's like working out like where I'm going and what I need prepared for this period of time. Things like restaurants we can eat at. Where's a laundromat? If a player gets sick, where can I get medicine from? Those kind of things. So when you're at an event and you're overseas, it is like full time 24/7. You basically you get up, work, and then if you're lucky, you sleep for like 6 hours.
If you're unlucky, a player calls you in the middle of the night because they have a sore throat or something like that, and then you
Yeah,
have to
something
figure
like
that out.
that. And there's jet lag to deal with, so you
Yeah.
don't sleep very well. And at the end of the day, when you're at a a major event, everybody's stressed. So emotions are high. You got to handle that. So it's a lot of like going on walks with people and making sure that everybody's emotionally settled and all that
Yeah.
kind of thing as well.
So,
So
like, who are the kind of people that you work with then? Because obviously you work with the players a lot. That's like your primary group of people that you work with. But presumably you work with the TO or whoever your contact is at the TO. You work with your org when you need to talk about whatever, something logistically. I'm sure there's a lot of different kind of stakeholders that you kind of have to not only like report to, but also work with.
yeah. So working for Mineski, I had my 2 main bosses, which is Kenshi and Oren. That I would obviously talk to very, very regularly about what's going on. They would give me instruction. They would take feedback. They would help me plan things. And then when you're at an event, on the event side things, when you're not talking to the players, you're also talking to the coach a lot, whoever the coach is, because the coach is kind of like your ally. And then when you're talking to, like, say, an ESL, what ESL will usually do is on their events team, they'll have a main project manager who's always there doing a bunch of things. And then he will have a team of player managers, usually 3 or 4, and those player managers will handle the needs of the team. So you have to build a strong relationship with the team manager from ESL. And then me personally, I always got to know the staff behind any event that I was at. So the ESL, I know the ESL people very well. I know the DreamHack people very well, just so that you get an idea of where the hierarchy is. And then sometimes there are certain issues where going to a player manager is just going to end up with them like kind of like running it up the rungs. So it helps to have a strong relationship with, say, the project manager, so that when there's a problem that happens that is big enough, you can go to them and be like, all right, we need to sort this like as soon as possible. And then they will know Like they'll have full information, and two, they'll know exactly who to go to like solve the issue.
Yeah, and then you don't have to
Um,
play Chinese whispers, right?
yeah, and it's again, it's just about having strong social skills, which is why I say that you need to work on yourself primarily. Like if you're not a person who can who is ready as a person to handle that kind of work environment, which is very dynamic, very flexible, requires excellent social skills, then you're going to have a lot of trouble.
All right. Well, maybe a little bit more of a fun question then now because
Sure.
we've been pretty serious. What's it like dealing with players most of the time? Because I'm sure there are, I don't think you're going to have an easy answer for this because it's going to be quite a broad one. There's going to be certain different players that are good, some that are bad. But as a general rule, is it tough or is it fun or what's the deal?
Do you want the PC answer or the actual answer?
I want the answer that's going to get me clicks, mate.
Okay. I don't. To be honest, players are all the same, really. I have yet to meet a player who has been very out of the box of what I'm used to experiencing. They're here to win. That's the only thing that motivates them for the most part. They want to play the game that they play. They want to be the best that they can. Um, and and I think this is true for a lot of players. Whether they're top level players, and I think the really, really top level players have started to get over this. But especially like your tier 1.5 down players, and even a lot of tier 1 players, they want to win their way. So they tend to be quite stubborn in how they want things to be, whether it be within the team, the way they play the game, outside of the game. So it's about you have to like learn to work with them and understand what they need and to like compromise strategically. Sometimes they can be drama queens. It's just like talent in anything, right? Like I'm sure you've experienced as well that there's a lot of like casters, analysts,
Yeah.
panelists who
Some people would
they
say I'm a drama queen.
I think you're a drama queen, Jordan.
Wow. All right. I see how it
But
is.
yeah, they can be dramatic. They have their ups, they have their downs.
Yeah.
um Sometimes you feel like you're not appreciated. It's just normal.
I get it.
But
Like they just want to do the
yeah, but
best job
overall
that
they're
they
good
can,
people.
if that makes sense. Like they want to be enabled to do their work as well as they can. And
Yeah,
so if
yeah, and
something's wrong,
it's
then they can have a bit of a problem with that, and then that's kind of on you to deal with and fix.
yeah, and you just at the end of the day, and this is just a cultural esports problem. This is not to do with players being the bad guy or the orgs being the bad guy or anything.
Mm.
Just the way that the esports ecosystem works, the relationship between teams and organizations and their players is very take and not very give. So they expect a lot out of you. Give me salary, give me prize money, look after me. But the amount that they give back to you, there isn't as much expectation. There's usually very like do the minimum.
Yeah, that's an
And
interesting topic as well,
that's
isn't it?
like every player, to be honest.
Yeah, I mean, I intend to have a chat with a player as well, inevitably somewhere down the track. I think that's something that I will be keen to bring up and get their thoughts on. But
Yeah.
I'm kind of on board with what you're saying there. Obviously, it'll be different on a case by case basis depending on what team you're managing as well. I feel like there's a lot of nuances maybe between, like, let's say you're managing a Dota team versus a Counter-Strike team, right? The Dota team probably has a much different expectation of what you need to be doing versus maybe what the Counter-Strike team. Is that correct, or is it more of like a parallel just across games? It doesn't really matter as far as your job is concerned.
Okay, so I think that it does. Players like personalities generally differ a little bit between game titles. I find Counter Strike players a little bit more jockey.
Yep.
COD players are more jockey. Dota players and League of Legends players are a little bit more nerdy, a little bit more like my people.
Yeah.
But what I will say is that when it comes to like the give and the take, that equation almost flips when there's ownership involved. So take for example Team Secret, right? So Team Secret's Dota 2 team, Puppy is one of the owners, one of Team Secret's owners, right? So he takes a lot of responsibility upon himself to make sure that the organization grows, because obviously it's it's growing a stake
Beneficial
that
for
he
him.
has, right? And then OG is another good example because those players own the org. So when it comes to the players being involved in the ownership of the org, the relationship between the org staff and the players is a lot different. But when there's players like just getting paid a salary from an org, then it's very like take and not very give.
Yeah. Oh well, I suppose that's a bit of a rabbit hole to dive into, but I want to dive into whether or not you've had any like. I mean, we're getting to the end of the podcast, right? So this is where you get to tell some interesting stories if you've got any. Is there like any horror stories, or is there any not or on the other end of other end of the spectrum? I'm not sure what the other end of the spectrum is of a horror
Yeah.
story, a dream story. I don't know. What's like your best case scenario? What's been the worst case scenario? Have you got
Okay.
anything you can
So
throw at me?
as far as horror stories go,
What's the
getting
worst day you've ever had at work, kind of thing?
getting knocked out of TI was pretty bad, pretty
Right.
bad. You put like honestly, even though it is just a job, should you do and you should get invested in what you do, right? So,
Mm.
following that team for a whole year and then finally making it to TI when we weren't sure that we were, it's very hard to not have your skin in the game, right? Um, so when you come to the end of TI, especially, so we had a very tight series with Team Secret at TI, which would have put us in top 8, and we ended up just losing that series, and that I call it kind of like falling off the cliff. I think that this is what pretty much every Dota player will do. Especially leading up to TI, is you put your 100% focus and emotion into Dota and what you're doing, and it's the same for the staff as well. It's the same for our friends and family who aren't even playing or don't even have a job at the team.
Mm.
Their full emotion and their full energy is in this. So when it comes to an end, you almost don't know what to do with yourself. You're very upset, to put it at the least. Like
Yeah.
I remember being on the verge of tears, sitting in the bus going back to the hotel and just feeling like absolute shit. So that was a bad experience, but it's like also an experience that I'm glad that I had. It's like a really good life experience for me. So that was pretty rough. As far as good experiences go, I do have like one pretty funny story. Um, so we were in Paris for the MDL Paris major,
Mhm.
and we were at a boot camp. So we boot camped at this place kind of in like the west of Paris. And one day I was going out to get food. I obviously don't speak French, right? So
That's
I walked
obvious.
down. Yeah, I walked down to this Japanese restaurant in the area that we were staying to go get food for the boys, and I walk in and tried ordering in English, and she's like, "I don't speak English," and I'm like, "Well, I don't speak French, so how are we gonna do this?" And so it's a Japanese restaurant, right? So I try a bit of Japanese, and
Uh-huh.
she just looked at me like, "What language are you speaking?" And I'm like, "Oh boy, here we go." So I looked around and I saw one of those like little cat paw things, and I was like, I guess they must be Chinese. So what I ended up doing was I ended up ordering at a Japanese restaurant in France using basic Chinese, because I know a
Yeah.
very tiny little bit of Chinese, just because half my players are Chinese, right?
Jeez.
Um, so I'm looking at this menu and I'm like, like one of this, two of this. Do you have this? Blah blah blah. So I eventually I come back with the food. And I put it down, and the players come out. They're like, "Where's the chopsticks?" And I was like, I tried to ask for them. I didn't know how to ask for them. I was like, chopsticks. Can you give me chopsticks? And she's looking at me like I have no idea what you're talking about. And so they're like, "Oh, it's okay, never mind." So then the players eat and go back, and then the coach comes out and he's eating, and same question again. He's like, "Where's the chopsticks?" And I was like, "Oh yeah, I just didn't know how to ask for them." He's like, "Oh, do you want me to teach you how to ask for chopsticks?" And I was like, "Yeah, sure." So he says, "Okay, you say 我要女人," which I learned later means I want girls.
Yeah. I was gonna say
Yeah,
that sounds
right.
familiar, and I didn't know what it meant, but it sounds
Yeah.
familiar to
So
something I'd
it's
learned in
it
China.
means like I want girls.
Right.
And so I go back to the restaurant.
Oh no.
And I said, like, 我要3个女人, like I want 3 girls, and she just looked at me like, what are you talking about? And I was like, can you give
Oh.
me, right? And she's just like totally confused. So I come back again. I don't have any chopsticks. The players come out, they're like, "Where's the chopsticks?" And I was like, "Oh, I asked for them in Chinese, and she just didn't understand." And the players are like, "What did you say?" And so I repeated it again, and they all burst into laughter. which was the cue for me. I don't know why I didn't realize earlier.
Yeah, I feel like
He
that's
told
something
me
that
the wrong way.
yeah, you probably should have picked up on pretty quick that it wasn't
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
legit.
So then we actually get to the major,
Mm.
and our coach who's Chinese. As soon as we get to the major, he runs off to the other Chinese teams, and we're standing around in the practice room, and I'm looking over it. I can see them like he's like pointing at me, and then they're all laughing.
Right.
And then I was walking past I think the LGD or the IG manager, like later on during the tournament. He's like, "Oh, it's Chopsticks Bro." So
Yeah.
long story short, my
That's you.
nickname as a manager is Chopsticks Bro now. Yeah.
Well, there you go.
So that's my funny
Well,
story.
I actually think that's a good story, at least the start of it, in like just an analogy of kind of what you or a situation that you might encounter, right? Because like you just need to figure out how you're going to get this done, even though you're not adequately equipped with the skills. You don't speak French. You're in a country where you don't speak the language. They don't speak English. You have to figure a way out of to do this sort of thing or get food or do something, right? And problem solving,
yeah.
right, is a big deal.
Yeah, exactly. It's like I said, it's about being adaptable and just realizing that you're going to end up in situations where you don't know what to do, and you just have to like find the best solution possible.
Yeah.
And nobody's going to hold it against you if you fail, but if you're not willing to make those mistakes and then cop it when you do, then you're going to have a lot of trouble, basically.
Yeah. All right. Well, let's start wrapping this up because I
Sure.
only got a couple of questions left for you. And I
Alright,
think
cool.
we sort of already talked about this one very much at the start, but like obviously careers that you can move into for from being a team manager, it seems like you can kind of go anywhere within the org, and then from there, once you've moved from that position in the org, you have those skills then built, and you can kind of go even further into another company or a business or somewhere in esports. So it sort of feels like the interpretation really is up to the individual as to where they want to go from if they started being a team manager.
Yeah, well, I mean, if you look at me, I mentioned this to you before the podcast, but I now work for an events company. So
Mm.
I work for the same company that had the Dota team. We actually we mainly manage events, and then we also run Dota teams as well. But so at the moment, my main role is I actually do sales and business development for this events company. So the majority of what I'm doing is reaching out to non-endemic sponsors and companies and brands and introducing them to esports, educating them about esports, and then using that for event sponsorship and joint ventures and stuff like that, which is totally in contrast to what I was doing
Mm.
last year. And then even at Avant, I did a lot of reporting and social media and marketing side stuff, but I didn't really do very much sales. So now I'm doing something completely different to what I was doing a year ago, and then different again to what I was doing 3 years ago.
So the
So
floor is yours, basically, depending on where
yeah,
you
pretty
want to
much.
go. What about
Yeah.
that role in 5 or 10 years? So do you see team managers still being something that is required in the future? It seems like it would be.
I mean, the NBA and NFL and um, baseball teams not have managers
I'm sure they
and
do.
coaches?
I don't know,
Yeah,
but I assume
I'm
they
pretty
do.
sure they do. I'm pretty sure they do. I know definitely that baseball and soccer teams have team managers and stuff. So I think that the responsibilities and the infrastructure and the like the structure and reporting and who's in charge of what
Mm.
will change a lot. But I think at a base level, the role will still always be there.
Yeah,
So
100%.
yeah.
All right, well, very last final thing, and I think you've been pretty heavy on this throughout the podcast. You've been heavy on the advice, but if you had one piece of advice to give to the new generation or the future generation of people looking for work in esports, what is the golden nugget from Zach?
Have perseverance. Really, you have to have perseverance.
Keep
The
knocking down the
esports is
doors.
gonna, yeah, esports is like it's gonna slap you around a lot, especially where it's kind of like the Wild West a lot. You just have to be resilient and have perseverance and keep going when like when things get tough or when there's roadblocks in front of you. You really just have to push through and look for the next opportunity, the next thing you can do, how you can fix problems, that kind of thing.
So that was Zach. You can catch up with him at -OCE on Twitter. Thanks very much for watching the video. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please feel free to drop a like and make sure you sub to the channel as well. And I hope to see you in the next episode.